This is GloomNode. Every hull that goes silent out there ends up as a file on a desk. This desk. I'm the Archivist, keeper of the Registry of Hulls and Souls, and your host down here among the closed cases. The Registry writes what it can prove and closes the drawer. I keep the other half, the part the finding leaves out. So pull up a chair. Tonight, a resupply ship 5 years into the dark, 500 people asleep in her belly, and a crew who worked out, one watch at a time, alone, that the way off her was getting longer while the world they were bound for only got closer. The Registry will call it a hull loss inquiry. You'll call it something else.
Registry of Hulls and Souls. Case designation, Registry 9367, filed under Fathom. Subject, Meridian Development Combine Hauler Sabine, Long Haul Resupply, inbound the settled world Cassard. Registered hull, sublight, rated operating complement 6. 500 souls carried in cold sleep in steerage, approved population enhancement, Cassard settlement. Commencement of record, Watch 41, the 5th year of the leg. Classification, hull incident, personnel loss. Clearance tier, public record. 4 operating souls unrecovered. 2 souls recovered at relief, examined at Calder Station, and released to service. Steerage complement, 500 souls accounted for, present and correct, delivered to Cassard reception. No structural breach recorded. No mechanical fault found. Certified internal geometry compliant with Meridian standard for long-haul carriage. Cause of loss undetermined. Disposition closed. Hull returned to service.
The Registry's closed for the night, which means the archive's open. Come in, mind the stacks, and pull the door closed behind you. There's a shelf down here for the ones that don't get argued about, the plain files, the ones where the paperwork behaves all the way to the end. This is a plain file. 6 people went to work in the dark between 2 worlds, and 4 of them didn't come off, and every single line the Registry wrote about it is true. They closed it under Fathom, which is an old word for how far down a thing goes. Hold on to that. You'll want it later. Now, I'll tell you the shape of it up front, because you're going to work it out anyway, and I'd rather you spent the night watching the people than guessing the ending. 6 stood the watches on a ship that carried 500 sleepers to a world that was waiting for them. 2 came off at the far end. The ship put distance between those people and the way out, a little more every watch, and it was better at it than they were, not cruel and not in a hurry, just patient past anything they had. Nobody ever saw a thing move. That's not me withholding. That's the file. The Sabine was a hauler, and I want you to see her plain, because the shape of the ship is the shape of everything that happens in it. Picture a long spine with a warm knot at one end, mess, bunks, control, the little sickbay, all the light on the whole vessel gathered into that one lit core. Everything else running back from it was cargo, bay after mothballed bay of the dull, useful freight a colony needs, powered down and cold for the crossing. And deep in her belly, furthest back of all, the steerage, 500 people folded into cold sleep in the one part of the ship no one walked. Warm core. Long dark body. Sleepers at the bottom. Remember the depth. The run was the thing nobody thinks about, and it's worth thinking about. Cassard was a settled world, an old frontier holding with families on it, and a mine that paid, but it sat off every gate lane there is, and a gate you can't reach is a gate that isn't there. So Cassard got supplied the slow way, once in a great while, by a hauler that spent years in the black getting to her. Meridian costed it out, the way Meridian costs everything, and freezing 500 colonists and carrying them sublight came out cheaper than any other way of getting them there. That's not villainy. That's a spreadsheet, and it was signed by people who never went, and by every measure the company uses, it was the correct decision. 6 of them awake to run her, and here is the part that matters, because the whole story lives in it. You don't keep 6 people awake for a 5-year crossing. You stand watches. 1 or 2 up at a time, a few weeks on, and then back into the cold while the next pair takes it. A relay of single minds, handing the ship down the years to each other. Which means that for most of any watch, a person on the Sabine was the only waking mind aboard, with a sleeping crew they couldn't reach, and 500 sleepers below they were keeping. You couldn't ask the others what they'd seen. They were under. All you inherited from the watch before you was the log. And there was one job the log couldn't do for you, and it's the job this whole file turns on. The law that carries 500 souls through the dark asks for a living witness to them, every watch. Not a green light on a panel, not the ship's own word that they're fine, but a person who walks back to the banks and lays eyes on them. The Registry counts hulls and souls, and a soul has to be seen. So every watch, whoever was awake, made the round, the long walk down the cold body of the ship to the sleepers, and the long walk back. You couldn't hand it to the ship. You couldn't skip it. And the sleepers couldn't be woken to help you. Waking 500 is a thing you do at Cassard, over days, with a receiving hospital, not a thing you do underway. The round was the story. The 2 you need most are the 2 who came off, so meet them first. Otline Reyes ran the watch. Her second long leg, steady, the kind of leader whose whole ambition for 5 years was a clean delivery. Her crew, her 500, and the freight, handed over at the far end with nobody missing. No secret, no grand plan. And Mary Voss kept the systems and the log and counted things. She was the one who knew the certified length of the round to the meter, because it was her number, and she was the one who noticed, first, when the number stopped behaving. Then Abram Stell, the senior hand, 3 long legs behind him, and he was the crew's proof that nothing happens on the crossing. He'd been out in it 3 times and come home 3 times, and he had the flat, unbothered manner of a man who'd already been frightened of the dark and got over it. And Juno Farrow, the medic, who minded the sleepers and minded the waking crew's heads coming up out of the cold. It's Farrow's word you'll want to keep in view, because when the time came to explain all this away, she was the one who could sign the paper that made the explanation stick. And the 2 at the young end. Thomas Lund kept her running and walked the drive spine like it was his own hallway, with a mechanic's flat contempt for anything that couldn't be measured and tightened. And Noah Prieto, who was on his first long leg anywhere, and who had spent the whole fitting out being told by the other 5 what the crossing was going to be like. Boring, they told him. Long. You sleep most of it. That's what they told him, and they weren't lying, and every one of them believed it. So the Sabine ran, the way she'd run for 4 years before, and for a long time she was exactly what they'd promised Prieto she'd be. Watches turned over. The core stayed warm, and the freight stayed cold, and the sleepers stayed green, and Cassard was a bright point ahead that got a shade brighter every time somebody looked. Voss logged the round each watch and measured it against her certified length and found it within tolerance each watch. Reyes wrote the same line into the log more nights than not, that the ship was well and the compliment was well, and they would make Cassard whole. Hold on to that line. In a few watches, it becomes the hardest job anyone aboard ever tried. It started on Lund's watch, and it started as nothing, and I want you to feel how much of a nothing it was. He made the round, out to the banks and back, and afterward he told the log the walk had run a little long, not by much, a few minutes over what it should. And he shrugged it off, because there is a real thing that does exactly that. Come up out of the cold and your sense of distance is off for a day. The law itself says a just woke crew's memory of how far is not to be trusted. So Lund wrote it down and thought no more of it, and he was right to think no more of it, and that is by a long way the likeliest reading of a round that ran a little long. Nothing happened for 3 watches. That's worth saying out loud, because in a story like this, you expect the trouble to start with the long walk, and it doesn't. 3 quiet handovers, the ship well, the sleepers green. Then Voss, who pulled the numbers because pulling the numbers was her job, laid the last few rounds side by side and saw a thing she didn't like. The round wasn't just long the once, it had been creeping, a little further every watch, never once shorter, always the one direction. She didn't say anything that night. She said it at the next handover, lightly, the way you float a thing you hope somebody will laugh at, and she watched their faces while she said it. Here is where the crew of the Sabine start being clever, and I want to be plain about it before we go on, because it matters to me that you don't spend the next half hour shouting at them. Nobody aboard is stupid. Nobody wanders off alone for no reason. Nobody keeps a dangerous thing to themselves. Nobody does the foolish thing the story would need them to do. They are 6 competent professionals on a lonely ship, and they make the right call at every single turn. That's the horror of it. Watch what happens to the right call. Stell had the next long round, and he walked the route the log gave him, and a junction wasn't where the last watch had logged it. The corridor bent a beat sooner than the record said, and the record was Voss's, and Voss didn't make that kind of mistake. Stell's position on it was steady and reasonable. Logs drift. Hands miscount. He'd walked wronger maps than this on worse ships, and come home from all of them. He wasn't ignoring the evidence. Understand, he was weighing it against 3 long legs of everything being fine, and everything he had said, this was a ship being a ship. They worked out the rule at the handover, 2 of them awake and comparing notes, the way people do, half joking, half not. Lund's round that ran long, the junction that had moved, the rounds creeping, watch over watch. Voss had the certified plan open in front of her, because Voss always had the plan open, and she put her finger on it and said the thing that turned the crossing. Every one of these is out in the cold body of the ship, she said. Not one of them is anywhere the light's on. Not one of them is anywhere somebody was standing. Now think about what that does to a room. A minute earlier, they had 3 odd little stories, and odd little stories are nothing. A ship generates a dozen a crossing. What Voss handed them was a pattern, and a pattern is a different animal entirely, because a pattern can be extended. Lund said it first, and he said it as a joke, and he was grinning when he started the sentence. If it's only the parts nobody's in, he said, then we know where it goes next. It goes inward, toward the parts we leave dark. Then he stopped grinning, roughly in the middle of the word inward, because there was only one thing at the inward end of the Sabine, and it was 500 people asleep. That's the moment the crossing turned, and there was no sound to it and nothing to see. 6 people and a certified plan they suddenly couldn't read the same way. Voss ran her finger down the length of the ship, inward, toward the banks, and the deepest section on the whole plan, the last one, the furthest thing from the airlock, was the steerage. It always had been. You keep the sleepers deepest, best shielded, hardest to reach. It's the correct way to build a hauler. She looked at it a while, and then she folded the plan, which did no good at all, because everyone aboard had it by heart. Stell's position did not move, and I want to give the man his due, because it's easy to make him a fool, and he wasn't one. He had done 3 long legs. He had heard haulers creak and watched numbers drift and walked bad maps, and nothing had ever come of any of it, and the actual base rate of the thing they were now discussing was 0. 0 out of every crossing anybody had ever made in the Reach. Stell wasn't refusing the evidence. He was weighing it against everything he had, and everything he had said. This was a ship. He was wrong. But he wasn't stupid, and there's a difference, and the difference is going to be the last thing he ever gets to be right about. So Reyes did the thing a good leader does, with an unexplained pattern and a crew getting quiet, which is to make a rule that costs nothing. Nobody walks the cold sections alone. The round goes in pairs from now on, eyes on each other, and you keep to the lit run wherever the lit run reaches. Post it, hold it, make Cassard. And it was a fine rule, and it would have held beautifully, except for one duty that neither the rule nor anybody's good sense could argue with, and it had been written into the ship since the day she was laid down. The round itself. The law wanted a living witness on the 500 every watch, and the ship's own word did not count, and there was no remote for a pair of human eyes. Somebody had to walk the cold body of the Sabine to the banks and look at the sleepers and walk back, every watch, without exception, into the exact part of the ship the pattern said was growing. It was designed by people who assumed the worst thing that far back in a hauler would be the dark and the quiet. Every watch, somebody had to go down. Feel the shape of that. Not a thing in a corridor, a line in the regulations. Every watch, one of 6 people in a lit room, had to walk the lengthening dark to 500 sleepers, put living eyes on them, and come back. And the interval didn't care what they'd worked out at the handover, and it didn't care about Voss's finger on the plan, and there was no version of the next weeks where somebody didn't make that walk. The dark wasn't the danger. The walk was the story. The first round under the new rule was Reyes and Lund together, and they did everything right. 2 lamps each, eyes on one another, the channel open, and Voss counting the range on the board. And it was fine, out and back, except that the board read the round 200 meters longer than the certified length, and the 3 of them talked it over and decided, together, that the board was drifting. It was a good evening after that. You could feel the crew settle. They had a rule, they had light, they had a plan, and each other. Prieto beat Stell at cards twice and was insufferable about it. I want you to have that evening. It's the last uncomplicated watch anybody on the Sabine gets. Late in that same watch, Voss was alone in control running the evening reconcile, with the range column up on the board the way it always was. The ship's own running red of her own distances, hull to bay, hull to banks, hull to lock. The range to the steerage was a number Voss had watched hold steady for 40 watches. She had it up now because she was chasing the drift, and she meant to prove it was nothing and put it to bed and get some sleep. Now, that number isn't a memory, and it isn't a guess. The ship pings her own length continuously, sends a pulse down the run, and listens for it back, because that's how a hauler roots around in the dark. It can't drift. any more than a tape measure drifts. It's the ship, measuring the ship. Every hauler in the Reach works that way. Voss knew it the way you know the distance from your bed to your own front door. The range to the steerage read longer than it had the watch before. Voss did the ordinary thing, the thing you'd do. She assumed a fault in the sensor and told the ship to ping it again. And the number came back higher than the number she had seen 10 seconds earlier. The same hull, the same certified length, signed off at dock, unchanged since. 2 pings, 10 seconds apart, and the distance to 500 sleeping people had gone up between them. She pinged it a third time. Higher. Mari Voss sat in a lit room with the door shut and watched the distance to the steerage climb, ping over ping, while the length of the ship she was sitting inside had not changed since the day it left the yard. And she did not call the others. Not yet. She pinged it again. There was nothing dramatic on it, and that's the part I need you to sit with. No alarm, no fault flag, no error tone. The ship answered cleanly and confidently every time, a good clean number, and the number was wrong, and it was getting wronger, and she was the only one awake to see it. Just the Sabine, calm as anything, telling her she was deeper than she was. Her hand was already moving toward the board to log it as a sensor fault and go to bed. And I want to stop us here a second, because this next part is the first thing on the Sabine that can't be argued with, and I'd like you to arrive at it the way she did. Voss was not frightened yet. She was annoyed. She had a fault on her board at the end of a long watch, in a crossing where the equipment had been perfect, and she was thinking about the paperwork. That's where her head was. Right there. On the paperwork. So she decided to walk it, to ground truth the ship's word with her own feet and a tape, out to the first junction and back, the boring fix that ends with a note that says, "Sensor, replace," at Cassard. She keyed her intent to the log, she tagged herself out at the core hatch with her own seal, and she went. 1 lamp, the channel open, the distance to that junction, a number she had known cold for 40 watches. She reached the junction, and she put her hand up to tag it, and her own seal was already on the hatch. This watch's tag. Her mark, her hand, the tab she peels and sets herself, and no one else carries. It was stuck to a wall the certified route put 100 meters deeper in the ship than where she was standing, on the far side of a junction she had not yet walked through. She could argue with a number on a board. She stood there in the cold, and she could not argue with her own hand on the wrong wall. She walked the others through it at the handover, and then she woke Reyes, and Reyes woke the rest, and for the first time in the crossing, all 6 of them were awake at once. 6 people in the lit core in the middle of a watch, looking at a seal tag that said the ship was longer than the ship. Stell said it was a sensor, and a tag she'd stuck twice and forgotten. He said it flat, and he did not sound like a man who believed himself, and nobody made him say it again. The round was still due that watch. The law still wanted its living witness on the 500, tag or no tag, fear or no fear. Reyes said she'd take it herself. Lund went instead. Now, I've gone through Reyes's deposition on this more than once, and she is careful about it, because she knows how it looks. He didn't sneak, and he didn't disobey. It was his spine, he knew every meter of it, everyone was ragged from a night of no sleep, and he told her he'd have the round done and be back before the kettle boiled. He took 2 lamps. He kept the channel open. He called his range every 30 seconds so control could hear him. He did every single thing right, and he wanted to be the one who did it so nobody older had to. Voss had him for 9 minutes. Out, and steady, calling his range down. 400, 380, 360, the way you sound on a walk you've decided not to be afraid of. He reached the banks. He said so. He said the 500 were green and folded and fine, and he'd lay his eyes across the last row and start back. He called 360 again, and then the number stopped falling. He was walking toward her, and the range began to climb. 400, 440, and he heard it too, and he said, puzzled, not yet frightened, that it says, I'm getting further, and he kept walking, and the number kept climbing, and then the channel was open, and there was nothing on it, and the range was still going up. Voss said his name 11 times. The board still had him. Present. Green. And moving away. They were down the spine in 4 minutes. All 5, every lamp on the ship. No rule about the cold, and no argument about it. His logged route to the banks was longer than it had been, and Lund was not on it, and the board said he was 4 kilometers down a spine the yard had certified at 2. At the banks, the 500 lay green and folded and untouched, one long room of sleeping strangers. And here is what was in that room with them. Lund's second lamp, on the deck. His tape, run all the way out to its full 300 meters and gone slack, the end of it feeding on past the far bulkhead into a dark that bulkhead should have been the end of. And his first lamp, upright on the plate, still burning, one set of his boot prints going in across the cold floor and none coming back out. It was the tape that did it. Mary Voss, who counted things, stood in a bay the yard had certified at 30 meters and looked at 300 meters of her crewmate's tape run out flat across it and into the wall, and she understood the thing before the others did, and she had to step back out into the corridor. The tape hadn't lied. The bay was 30 meters, and the tape was 300, and both of those were true at once, in the same room, at the same time. The others watched her face while she got there. They searched for hours, and I'll spare you most of it. 4 people going down the cold body of the ship with lamps, calling a man's name into bays that read one length by the plan and another by the tape. But there are 2 things from that search you need. The first is that Reyes made them stop and sleep in shifts and had to take Stell physically by the arm to do it, because Stell wanted to walk the spine alone calling until his lamp died. The second is what the search found, which was nothing, because the board still had Lund on it, present and green, his range past the top of the scale now, a living man, at a distance the ship did not contain. You cannot search a place that is only ever getting further away. Reyes raised Cassard reception and declared an emergency, and I want you to hear the answer she got, because it isn't cruelty and it isn't even indifference. It's a timetable, and the timetable is physics. The Sabine was inbound on a fixed approach. The boat came up to meet her at orbit, and not 1 hour before, and there is no Ansible to hurry and no lane to cut. Reception was decent about it. They logged the emergency, and they said the right things, and they confirmed the boat would be against the lock at first light on arrival, as scheduled. 12 watches out. Nobody arrives early. You know that rule. They knew it too, and across 5 years, it had never once meant a single thing. So they built themselves a fortress, and it was a good one, and it was made of paper. Farrow signed it. What Voss had seen, and what the tape had shown, and the rounds that ran long, all of it, Farrow certified, was Hauler's Drift. And Hauler's Drift is a real thing, a filed thing, a documented failure of a crew's own sense of distance when they've been too long in and out of the cold. The whole watch was overdue for relief. The board had been serviced by tired hands. So they broke the solo watch rule, put 2 awake at all times, and resurveyed the crude length of the ship together, tapes in 4 hands, every number checked twice, in the light. Ground truth, restored and signed. And it worked. The resurvey closed clean. 6 watches went by, and nothing climbed. The range to the steerage held, the rounds came back on the certified length, and the ship sat around them, honest as a ship at dock. Faro recertified the crew fit to stand. On the 6th of those watches, Reyes wrote in the log that she believed the crew, and she believed the 500, and she believed they would all make Cassard, and she signed it, and she meant every single word. On the 6th watch, the range to the steerage, steady for 6 watches, dead level, a good number, moved. Not a creep this time. A step. Once, all at once, while 2 people watched the board. Voss was looking straight at it. It hadn't drifted up under a tired eye at the end of a long shift. It had stepped up, clean, under 2 clear ones. And while they were both staring at that, Voss pulled the clean resurvey, the one they'd all signed, 4 hands, twice checked, ground truth, and took the total off the bottom, and the total was already longer than the certified length of the ship when they signed it. 2 minds had agreed on a wrong number and called it truth. Reyes said, out loud, to the room, that you cannot missurvey a ship by 400 meters with 2 people and tapes. She was right. You can't. And they had. That's the watch the want changed, from stand the watches and make Cassard, to get the 3 of us to the lock, and get there now. Day after that, they had a new problem, and it was worse than the old one, because the old one they thought they'd solved. The fortress had been built on ground truth, and ground truth was gone. Reyes put it to them plain: assume every distance on the ship is a lie the moment nobody's holding it. So the rule changed again. Somebody's eyes are on the route at all times. The run to the lock and the run to the banks, watched always, because the one length that had never once climbed was a length a living person was looking at. That last part was Voss's, and it was a good rule, and it was true, and it was the trap. They tested it, and it held. A watchstander sat at the core junction with eyes down the spine, and the range held dead steady the whole watch. Didn't creep, didn't step, held. It worked. It worked the way everything on the Sabine worked, which is to say, for exactly as long as it was the newest thing they'd tried. Prieto and Stell ran a paired round to the banks under Voss's unbroken eye on the board, and it came back clean, and they let themselves feel it, a little. Reyes and Prieto had the round, Reyes 4 steps ahead, Prieto behind with the kit, both of them talking, and Voss on the board watching 2 dots the whole way. At a junction, Reyes glanced down to read her own tape. 1 glance, off the boy, onto the number in her hand. When she looked up, Prieto was 4 steps back, exactly where he'd been. Still talking, mid-sentence, easy, about the kit. And the board said he was 900 meters behind her, and the number was climbing, and his voice was still right there at her shoulder. Calm. 4 steps back and 900 meters away, and getting further. 4 steps. 900 meters. Both true. 4 of them now. Reyes, Voss, Stell, Faro. The gaze rule was worth nothing. It hadn't needed the dark, and it hadn't needed anybody alone, and it hadn't even needed you to stop watching for long. A glance. And Stell, this is the beat I want you to hold on to. Stell still said it. Not hauler's drift anymore, he'd let that go. But he stood in the core and told 3 exhausted people that whatever this was, it was distance, and distance is a thing a man can walk, and he had walked longer ships than this one and come home. He needed that. You'd have needed it too. So they answered the only way they had left, which was to watch harder. They rigged the spine's own inspection cameras and set the ship's continuous ping to hold a machine's eye on every length at once. And they pulled everything and everyone into the one lit run between the lock and the banks, end to end, where they could all see it whole. It was hard, filthy, useful work, and it did them good to be doing it. Pharaoh logged the crew steady. Voss kept counting. They held that run under camera and ping and human eye, unblinking, for a full watch, and it held. And then the numbers moved anyway, out past the cameras, where no living person happened to be looking. Because a camera sees a length, it doesn't hold it in a mind, and the ship's ping measures a length, it doesn't witness it. The range to the steerage, behind the sealed core, off the human eye, began to climb again. Voss said it first, and she said it flat, the way she said everything true. It isn't the dark, she said. It isn't being alone, and it isn't even not looking. It's not being witnessed. A lens is not a witness. And I think, by then, the ship had known that about them for a long time. The round came due again, and this is where I need you to sit at the table with them. 4 people, in a lit core, with 500 sleepers, 4 kilometers down a 2-kilometer spine that needed living eyes on it. This watch, or the delivery, was void, and the law said the souls weren't accounted for. Nobody suggested not going. There was nothing to suggest. Pharaoh said she'd go. They were her sleepers, and she could read a bank of them faster than anybody. Reyes said no. Pharaoh went anyway, without heat, the way you'd correct a rotor. She was the one who'd signed the paper that called it drift. I've thought about that a great deal. So Pharaoh went to the banks on that watch, with Stell 40 meters back at the core hatch, holding it on his shoulder, his eyes locked down the spine on her the whole way, the best compromise 4 people could reach between not going alone and not putting 2 bodies in the same cold room. Pharaoh reached the banks. She laid her eyes across the 500 and called them green, 1 row at a time, her own voice and her own hands, no gap in it, and Voss logged every word. And then Juno Pharaoh said, in a completely ordinary voice, that she was going to come back now. Stell was 40 meters off, with his eyes fixed straight down that spine, and he saw nothing come and nothing go. What he saw was Pharaoh turn to walk back, small and lit at the far end, and the corridor between them lengthen. Not her stepping further off. The floor itself, adding to itself, between one of his heartbeats and the next, in silence, while he watched. Pharaoh walked toward him at an ordinary pace and got no nearer, and her range climbed, and she didn't know it yet, and Stell did. He watched it happen and could not stop it by watching. He did not go in. And I'll say for him what I said for the last man who stood in a doorway and didn't go into the dark. Neither would you. Voss logged Pharaoh's last range, 5 figures, still climbing, still green on the board, still, for a while, talking, until the channel was only open. 3 left now, Reyes, Voss, Stell. And Voss wrote the number down, because she was Voss, and she set it in the log in a row beside Lund's and beside Prieto's, 3 measurements in a line, like she was still hoping they'd add to something. They didn't. That's why they ended up in my half of the file, and not the other one. 3 of them, and the world coming up in the window. Cassard was close now. close enough to show weather on it, a day out, a green and grey thing turning in the black, the one number on the whole ship that had never once lied. They pulled into the shortest defensible thing left, the airlock antechamber, hard hull on 3 sides, 1 door, and the way off the Sabine at their backs. Reyes cut the route to the steerage out of the plan. There was no reaching the 500, and they all knew it, and none of them said it, and the not saying was its own kind of grief. And they kept a watch. Of course they did. 1 awake, eyes on the door and the spine beyond it, 2 resting in a lit box with the lock at their backs. It's the right call. It's what you'd do, and it's what I'd do, and there's not one thing wrong with it. They ran that watch, and it held, the way everything they built held, for exactly as long as it was the newest thing they'd tried. And it was standing in that box, a day out from Cassard, that Mari Voss finally understood the thing she'd had backwards since the first climbing ping. And I need you to notice that she does not work out what it is, or why being seen should matter to a ship, or where any of it came from. She never does. Nobody ever does. What she works out is smaller than that, and much worse. They were never going to bring the 500. A sleeper cannot witness their own room. The steerage was the one length on the whole ship that no waking mind could ever hold, and so it was the one length that had been free to grow from the very first watch. Everything they had ever built protected the people doing the watching. Nothing any of them could have done would ever have protected the ones being watched. They didn't lose the 500 to distance. They lost them to sleep before anyone was awake to lose them. That's the whole of it, and it explains nothing at all. It doesn't tell her what took Lund, or how a corridor grows behind a walking man, or why a living eye holds a length still and a camera doesn't. She never learns any of that, and neither will you. All it tells her is the size of the problem, and the size of the problem is sleep itself. Every sleeper on every hauler in the Reach, folded in a room that no one is holding. She stopped thinking of the Sabine as a ship carrying 500 people. She started thinking of her as 500 rooms nobody was looking at, with a lit box at one end where 3 people were still awake. So on the last day, they made the last plan anybody made aboard the Sabine. And it was the worst plan of the crossing, and it was also the only one. The boat came up at orbit, first light, and set against the lock. 3 people, 1 short lit run to that lock, and away across it the ship couldn't close if they watched it every step. They'd go out backward, all 3, eyes locked on the deepening dark behind them, never off it, because the one length that had never grown was a length under a living gaze. Walk out watching. That was the plan. That was the best 3 people could do after 5 years and 4 friends, and I think it was right. The trouble with 3 people and 2 directions is arithmetic, and they worked it out at the door. Someone had to watch the way back, and someone had to watch the way ahead to the lock, and a line of 3 crossing a gap that lengthens cannot all hold both at once. Reyes forward, calling the lock. Voss in the middle, calling the range. And Stell at the rear, eyes on the deep, walking backward, holding the dark still with nothing but his attention. They crossed. Cassard's light coming through the lock ahead of them, the spine deepening behind, Voss calling the range, and Reyes calling the door, and Stell calling the dark. Meters of it, foot by foot. And it held under Stell's eyes. Every length the man looked at stayed the length it was. Halfway across, the lock read further than it had a moment before, and Reyes didn't break stride, and they all heard her breathing change on the channel, and not one of them said a word about it. Then the gap opened. The dark behind Stell began to grow faster than a man walks backward, and the space between him and the other two started to lengthen, the one length no single gaze could hold, because Stell was holding the deep and could not also hold the 6 feet between his own back and Voss. He knew it before they did. He told them to keep going and keep their eyes forward and not turn around. And then he stopped, and he turned his back on the two of them and faced the deep alone and held all of it with his eyes so the way ahead would stay short for them. Abram Stell, 3 long legs, home from all of them, stood in a lengthening spine and held the dark still with his attention, while Reyes and Voss went forward, watching toward the lock. It was the last thing he did that was any use to anybody, and nobody thanked him for it, because they couldn't look back. Looking back was the one thing that would have wasted it. Voss heard his range come up on the channel. It started to climb. At the moment Stell was past holding it, the ship laid down its last length all at once, and the sound of it reached them. It came from the wrong side. One hard report of steel arriving where no steel had any business being. Not down the spine behind them, but out through the hull at their shoulders, from the far side of a wall that was supposed to be the last plate between the Sabine and the Black. There is no inside that deep. There was now a new length of ship being born in the one heartbeat between Stell and the lock. And then the lock was under Reyes's hand. They cycled it watching it, and Cassard's boat was against the seal, and 2 people crossed into it forward watching and did not look back. Because Stell was a number on a channel now, and looking back could not help him and would only have cost the crossing. The pilot was decent to them. There was nothing behind them but ship, and more of it than there had been. And the Sabine made orbit, on schedule, because the one thing that never failed anybody in this whole story is a timetable. She came up on Cassard to the hour. A boat took 2 people off her, and Cassard sent a team aboard to bring the 500 down to the steerage, along a round that read, by then, a distance the ship did not contain, climbing, ping over ping, 500 green dots at the far end of it. Voss went in with the count, because she was Voss, and there was nothing to reach and nothing to bring, and she came back to the boat.
Registry of Hulls and Souls. Case Registry 9367, filed under Fathom. Supplemental finding. Hauler Sabine long-haul resupply delivered Cassard, reached standard 224. 4 operating souls unrecovered, Lund, Prieto, Ferro, Stell. 2 souls recovered at relief, examined at Calder Station, and released to service. Steerage complement, 500 souls, accounted for, present and correct, in cold sleep, delivered to Cassard reception. Recovered remains, none. Structural integrity certified intact. No breach recorded. Certified internal geometry compliant with Meridian standard. Cause of loss undetermined. Hull returned to service. Disposition closed.
Present and correct. Sit with those 2 words a moment, the way I've had to. There was an inquiry, a real one, conducted by real people, and they boarded a hauler with no breach and no fault, and they measured the crude length of her, and she measured exactly to spec, and they counted 500 souls on the manifest. Everyone accounted for, every monitor green, and 4 crew who were aboard and could not be reached. There is no box on the form for a soul that is present and cannot be reached. So they wrote accounted for, which is the honest word, and they delivered the manifest, because the manifest balances.
1.
Both depositions are in the drawer. Reyes's runs long and is very precise, and she never once speculates. Times, positions, decisions, a lead giving an account, and the only thing she asks for at the end is that the witness interval on long-haul steerage be reviewed. It was reviewed. It was found compliant. Voss's is shorter, and it reads differently, and I've gone through it more times than is good for me, because Voss counted things and her deposition is mostly numbers. 200 meters. 300 meters of tape in a 30-meter bay. 900 meters. 4 steps. A 5-figure range, still climbing. She lays them out in a row like she's still hoping they'll add up to something. They don't. Now here's what I have that the finding doesn't, and it isn't much, and it's the reason this one sits on my shelf and not in the general stacks. Every long-haul hauler that ever made port, 500 souls, 1,000, 2,000 at a time, delivered them. Accounted for. Present and correct, every crossing there's ever been. And there is not one procedure anywhere in the reach for confirming that a delivered sleeper, monitor green, manifest closed, is a distance a boat can actually cross. Nobody's ever needed one. The souls are always there. The column balances. I've sat with that a long time. I still can't tell you whether there's anything in it. Stell was not a fool. I keep coming back to him. 3 long legs, home from all 3, and he stood in that box and said it's distance, and distance can be walked. And he was working from every single piece of evidence a man in his trade could have, and his evidence was good, and he was wrong. That's not stupidity. That's what it looks like when the base rate finally comes for somebody. Everyone who ever delivered a crossing delivered it. That's the only data anybody has. It's the data they gave Prieto, in the light, 5 people who'd have done anything for the boy. It'll be boring, they told him. You sleep most of it. They tried 6 things. Distrust their own tired memory. Never walk the round alone. Ground truth it with tapes, in the light, 4 hands. Watch the route and never stop watching. Set the machines to watch what the eyes couldn't. And leave, watching every step. Every one of them worked. That's the part that goes through me, every time. Not one was foolish, and not one failed on the watch they thought of it. Each one bought them time. Each was better than the last. And each one worked right up until it had been working long enough to be understood, and then a length grew somewhere nobody was holding, and somebody was gone. They weren't outmatched for distance. They were outmatched for patience, by a ship with 500 rooms nobody was looking at, and all the time in the world. Otline Reyes left the trade. Runs a berth desk on Calder now, and doesn't sleep on a hauler anymore, and has never once, in the years since, gone on record with a theory about what happened to her crew, which I respect more than I can tell you, because she is one of 2 living people who were there, and she could say anything she liked, and she says only what she saw. Mary Voss went back out. She works long-haul steerage, by choice, one crossing after another. Her employers think it's nerve. I've gone through her deposition. I think she's counting the sleepers. That's the case. And that's why they filed it under Fathom, because a fathom is a measure of depth, an old one, from a time when people put a weighted line over the side into dark water to learn how far down the bottom was, and let it run out through their hands, and sometimes the line ran all the way out and never found it. The Sabine's on her next leg tonight, loaded, inbound somewhere, 500 people asleep in her belly, and 6 standing watches alone, one at a time, walking around to lay eyes on the sleepers. Because the law is sensible and the law is right. So go on home now, mind the stacks, and pull the door closed behind you. The registry certifies what is known. I keep the rest. And if you sleep tonight in a room at the end of a hall, and you're the last one awake in the house, and there's nobody holding that hallway in their mind but you, don't count the doors between you and the way out. It never comes back the same. Don't hurry. It never does.